Yo, what's going on people? It's your boy Huncho back at you again with another video. And so for this next one, we've got to head over to Harrow, where a case has recently just wrapped up from an incident that happened way back in May of 2018. A lot of you might be asking yourself why it took this long for a conviction to happen. Well, that's because this case was extremely complex and it took the police nearly 2 years to charge the total of 7 people who they said were involved in this case. Before we get into this one though, it should be noted that 2 separate trials went ahead that involved these 7. The first is the trial we'll be looking at today, but more recently 4 out of the 7 were on trial and they had the charges dropped against them. The same can't be said for the other 3 though. I'm unsure of the reasoning for the 2 separate trials because it doesn't exactly make that clear, but they had all been up for the same charges, and now that's being cleared up, let's jump into this one. So this story takes place on the 1st of May 2018, and at around 8:50 PM, police had been called to reports of a shooting on Saharded Way close to Queenbury Underground Station in Harrow. When they arrived at the scene along with the London ambulance service, they discovered a man by the name of 38-year-old Leon Maxwell, also known as Sykes, suffering from gunshot injuries. You see, what had happened was just minutes before police arrived at the scene, a stolen moped with a rider and pillion passenger had pulled up to a car Leon and his friend had been sitting in, and it was then, in what's thought to have been a case of mistaken identity, this pillion passenger opens fire. He fires 5 shots into the car, hitting both men in the chest. Leon specifically was hit in his lung. Once the moped makes off, Leon staggers into a communal entrance to a nearby block of flats, but ultimately when paramedics arrived, he would go on to be pronounced dead at the scene. But luckily, his friend had survived the shooting. After getting a taxi and admitting himself to hospital, he went on to make a full recovery. So a murder investigation was opened by the Metropolitan Police, and like I said at the start of the video, this investigation was going to prove extremely difficult for police due to mainly both of the moped riders wearing crash helmets. Either way though, the police began an extensive search through CCTV footage within 3 miles of the shooting and recovered more than 1,000 hours worth of footage. This included an area that is known for local gang activity who were suspected of being involved in the shooting. When the investigation came to what appeared to be a dead end, detectives decided to take a different approach in the investigation. They now focused their efforts around the theft of the moped which was used in the shooting. This resulted in the thief going on to be identified, and on a quick side note, he has since been convicted for his involvement in the theft of that moped. He was handed an 8-month jail sentence and was handed a training order. As the investigation continued, police would find a vital piece of evidence in relation to forensic analysis. DNA belonging to a man known as Saharded Hassan was found on one of the bullet casings found at the scene. He would go on to be arrested in connection with the shooting a short time after, but there wasn't enough evidence to connect him to the shooting itself. In March of 2019, nearly a whole year later, 5 men would go on to be arrested and 131 mobile phones would go on to be seized, creating further forensic and analysis opportunities for police. But still no charges had came around, and it was then detectives continued to view hours of CCTV footage to link the moped to the suspects they had in mind. Throughout the investigation, it was believed that the moped had been exchanged several times and suspects had went through the effort of changing their clothes in an attempt to conceal and hide their identity. Eventually though, police were ready to bring some charges down, and in 2020, 7 people including Rajae Heslop Irwin Constable and Saharded Hassan were charged with murder, attempted murder, and an alternative charge of causing grievous bodily harm with intent. Police believed that Rajae was the moped rider, Irwin was the shooter, and Saharded had organised the hit after believing that Leon and his friend were a part of the Queenbury boys gang. Of course, this wasn't the case. After all denied the charges that had been brought against them, a trial went ahead which ended in March, but could only be reported on recently because this other trial was ongoing again, which is recently wrapped up. In court, it was heard that rap lyrics by both Rajae and Saharded played a part to connect them to the incident. Rajae had in fact fled the country after the shooting, but after evading arrest for more than a year, he decided to return after he thought the situation had been wrapped up. But boy was he wrong, because when he returned, he was in fact arrested, and when they arrested him, they found a song he had written up which depicted his involvement in the murder. We don't know the exact lyrics, but to say that it depicted his involvement in the murder, it must have placed him at the scene. While on remand in Exeter, Saharded had also wrote about gang violence, which was shown to the court as saying, quote, "Anything Queenbury soon get burned. My young boys get round there and burn him," which the prosecution would go on to say linked him to this incident. After a trial at the Old Bailey, all men would go on to be found guilty of murder and attempted murder. Saharded was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 32 years for the murder charge and 20 years for the attempted murder charge, and they will run concurrent. Rajae was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 28 years for the murder charge and 18 years for the attempted murder charge, which again is to run concurrent. Irwin was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 24 years for the murder charge and 17 years for the attempted murder charge, again to run concurrent. And so a pretty interesting story where even though it took the police a few years to eventually get convictions, it does show that the Metropolitan Police, when they've opened, say for example, a murder investigation, they won't stop until they get those convictions. Of course, we did go over this before in the case of GB, where of course until right now no one has ever been convicted of his murder, but as soon as police get something solid to link someone to the case, they do go on to make convictions. And again, like I did say in that GB video, in 10-15 years time, we might actually see some charges brought against someone and someone eventually go down for his murder. Until now, that isn't the case. And of course, like you've seen in today's video, that is definitely a possibility. But I do want to take this time out just to say rest in peace to Leon, and I do want to send my condolences out to his family and friends at this current time. But let me know what you guys think of this down in the comment section below. Give the video a little like, and if you want the latest drill, street and music news out of the UK, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. It's been your boy Huncho, and I'm out.